Well, hello and welcome. I'm Mark Mercer, the president of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, and this is a session sponsored by SAFS at SMU, SAFS at St. Mary's. And we have Christina Behme with us today. Christina, you may know, is an active member of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. I believe she's had 11 articles in the SAFS newsletter since just July 2017. 11 or 12 articles. She's been 4 talks of hers have been sponsored by SAFS, 2 of them at the annual general meeting. Christina's a philosophy professor at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Surrey, British Columbia. She's regularized there. She writes mainly in philosophy of language, linguistics, evolution of language, that is evolution of animals that can speak, and then the evolution of languages themselves. But she's interested in all things philosophical. She's published in Plato and Descartes, evolutionary theory. As I said, she's very active in the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. And so today, she'll talk about addressing disinformation about free speech. Christina.
Thank you very much, Mike. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out on such a nice sunny day. Has changed. Now it works. Yeah, thanks. So just a brief kind of overview. I will be talking a little bit about what freedom of speech, freedom of expression is, why it's important, how it is different or very similar Canada versus East Germany. Obviously, I see no harm principle is important, so I will briefly talk about that, what is mis or disinformation, and then I will actually get into the notorious everybody agrees that argument, and I will show why we as defenders of free speech are well advised to just completely ignore this kind of argument. And I will be talking a little bit about hypothetical versus actual cases, whether speech actually causes harm, how it causes harm, and if the solution really is policing speech, as obviously a lot of people who claim it causes harm are suggesting. Oops. Right. So even the United Nations agree that freedom of speech is a really, really important human right. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was adopted in 1948 in Article 19, it says everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart informations and ideas through any media, and regardless of affiliation, frontiers. So this is probably one that we should quote very often when we interact with our administration. In East Germany, freedom of speech also was defended in the Constitution. Paragraph 27 of our Constitution granted every citizen the right to free speech and freedom of the printed press, radio and television. However, just in Canada, we had some limitations. So our criminal code listed staatsfeindliche Hetze, that is subversive agitation, and Missbrauch der Medien für die bürgerliche Ideologie as punishable offenses. So Article 6 was actually outlining the kind of things that were punishable by law if you engaged in them, and they sound pretty familiar to racial and ethnic-based hatred and that kind of stuff. The difference maybe was that in East Germany, they took that really seriously. So they were very serious offenses. You would go to jail if you would voice opinions like foreigners should go home and that kind of stuff. And obviously, if you do that, nobody will voice those kind of opinions. And Article 9 was the one that actually granted us all kinds of rights. Again, very similar to in Canada, all citizens have the right, within the limits of existing law, to express their opinion freely and to assemble for this purpose freely and unarmed, and so on. There is to be no censorship of the press. So that was something that was actually in our constitution. And of course, Canada, very similar. Freedom of speech is protected as a fundamental freedom by Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but it is not an absolute right. Section 1 of the Charter allows the government to put limits on free expression so long as the limits are reasonable and can be justified. And we have recently seen what all can be reasonably justified. So hate speech and obscenity are two examples that are very often used to justify exceptions. So Section 318 of the Criminal Code makes it illegal to promote genocide, for instance, and Section 319 makes it illegal to publicly incite hatred against people based on their color, race, religion, and so on. And so there seems to be this idea that we can apply mill here. So freedom of speech is a really, really important right, except when it causes harm. And so in those cases, harm prevention trumps freedom of speech. And it's really interesting to notice when you Google things like John Stuart Mill, free speech, no harm principle, you will actually immediately be warned. So it's not just that 50,000 articles come up, but the very first thing that you read, featured snippet from the web, is speech is never free of consequences. It advances some interests over others. It matters. In other words, Mill's harm principle is always already violated. So that is what the people on Google want everybody to know before we even get started. Now, Mill obviously famously said, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. And Mill believed that the only time you are actually justified to interfere with other people is when you try to prevent them doing harm to others. If a person is about to do harm to themselves, according to Mill, you will have no right to interfere with them. It has to be harm to others. And then, of course, my favorite Chomsky quote when it comes to freedom of speech: if you believe in freedom of speech, you believe in freedom of speech for views that you do not like. Goebbels was in favor of freedom of speech for views that he liked, and so was Stalin. If you are in favor of freedom of speech, that means you are in favor of freedom of speech precisely for views that you despise. And yeah, people on the far left do not really like that quote. So recently there has been a lot of debate about we need to prevent disinformation because disinformation causes harm, be it during the Trump era, be it dealing with COVID and so on. Of course, when you check again what information and disinformation is, it depends very much on whom you're asking. So information is that which resolves uncertainty, anything that answers the question what a given entity is. Communication about knowledge, the act of imparting knowledge, the act of informing against someone, passing on incriminating knowledge, that is also information. And yes, the Stasi did that very well. Systematic imparting of knowledge, education, and so on. And so that is all really, really important. But I recently learned a lot about the terms misinformation, disinformation. So really the main difference is when I perpetuate misinformation, I believe it to be true, it just happens to be false. Disinformation is I know it to be false and I pretend it to be true and I have some kind of malicious intent here. And so in East Germany, examples of information where...
Can you go back to the previous slide? I did not get collision.
Okay. So malinformation is just the stuff when you provide information on people that they don't want you to pass on. So if I, for instance, would provide a list of everybody who attended this meeting and then give it to you guys' administration to get you in trouble, that kind of stuff. So in East Germany, our newspapers and television were controlled by the government, kind of like CBC. And our schools and universities taught lesson plans that were approved by the government. That was a little bit different than it is in Canada. As a professor, you couldn't just say, okay, I teach biology and I teach what I think it's important. They were really strict lesson plans that you actually had to follow. Doesn't mean that everybody always did that. We had some people that were great storytellers and talked very little about what they were supposed to talk about. As long as it wasn't politically motivated, that was kind of okay. So some of the examples where we live in a period of a worldwide transition from capitalism to communism. Socialism offers all children a chance to get a good education. Socialism provides free health care for everyone. The wall protects East Germans from spies and saboteurs. That was something that they really taught us in school. Socialism protects the environment, but also things like 2 + 2 = 4, or a mother is a woman who has given birth to at least one child, or maybe adopted at least one child. So it's kind of like, and of course we had this information in East Germany. So one final example was the purpose of the anti-fascist bulwarks, that is actually what we called the wall, is to protect us from spies and saboteurs from West Germany. Now, obviously, the government knew that that was false, that the war wasn't there to protect us from spies, it was there to prevent us from escaping this wonderful country we lived in. And of course, we, the citizens, also knew that it was wrong. However, anyone who was questioning that, at least like publicly, was severely punished. And so we all acted as if we believed it to be true. So they knew that we knew that it was wrong, and we knew that they knew. Exactly, yeah. It's kind of like this COVID nowadays. So information isn't neutral. That was one of our many slogans. Seid wachsam. sichert die Errungenschaften unserer Deutschen Demokratischen Republik vor den Anschlägen der Spione, Saboteure und Agenten. Be vigilant. Protect our accomplishments. Yeah. Another fun thing about East Germany was that, yeah, it's okay to trust our citizens, but it's really better to make sure that we really get it. So officially, we didn't have any access to West German newspapers, and watching West television and listening to West radio was officially discouraged. But it's kind of difficult to prevent it entirely. And of course, in Germany, we were in this unique position. We spoke the same language as the people on the bad capitalist side. So there was a lot of influence. And so we had this wonderful guy, Karl Eduard von Schnitzler, who did damage control. He played short clips from West German television shows, and then he explained why they were wrong and what was wrong with it. The show was called Der Schwarze Kanal, the Black Channel, which referred to West television. It's actually the ARD, that was the first television program in West Germany. And in order to entice us to really watch it, it was kind of sandwiched between two very popular evening shows. Didn't really work that well. It attracted less than 5% of the viewers because this guy was really obnoxious. And looking back, I wish maybe I had paid more attention because, like, historically speaking, it's now really interesting. But most of the time, I just ignored this guy entirely. Now, there's another interesting thing to know about East Germany. There were two areas in East Germany that we called das Tal der Ahnungslosen, Valley of the Clueless. The reason we called it that was because in those areas, for geographical reasons, you didn't get much of reception of West television. So they really only were exposed to our version of CBC. And so people, yeah, so what exactly? Now, if it actually were the case that banning hate speech, staatsfeindliche Hetze, and so on works, then you would expect that people who never were really exposed to it would have been a lot more tolerant, let's say, of immigrants, of foreigners, and so on, than people who were living in areas of East Germany where you had regular access to the so-called hate propaganda from the West. Well, the reality was that people in all areas of the GDR rarely watched political education shows like Der Schwarze Kanal, and that most citizens had at least some exposure to the so-called West German hate propaganda, and of course critical engagement with it in West German radio and television. And obviously, officially in West Germany, hatred to foreigners was also not popular. But there, you every once in a while had an engagement, and that was like in the 70s, 80s. Those things were still publicly debated. After the wall came down in East Germany, it turned out that people living in the Valley of the Clueless were actually significantly more likely to vote for the extreme right and or to be really racist and xenophobic. And the bad news is that is still the case some 30 years later. So when you look at the election results in those areas, you will find the most votes for the really far-right political parties. permitted speech in East Germany was pretty straightforward. So you knew exactly what the rules were. And the rules didn't change overnight, as in some other places I know. So the truth essentially was determined by our world view. It was a strict top-down control. So the government and our Communist Party determined what was and wasn't acceptable speech, and everybody knew it. There were really severe penalties for violating the rules. So if you were officially saying something like Honecker sucks and should we not get another government, you would find yourself in serious trouble. And so people were smart enough not to do that. The rules were well known, virtually unchanging, and taught from daycare, kindergarten, school, university, and continued in the workplace. So we also had some kind of equivalents of sensitivity training and stuff like that. Marxism was considered to be a science. Therefore, East Germany was pro-science. And our experts, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, are always right. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So in our official discourse, there was virtually no opposition to the limits on freedom of speech that were imposed by our government. Oops. Now let's return to Canada. During the COVID pandemic, obviously, there was a lot of fight about what you are allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say. And this article is really recommended for people who don't think it's bad enough in Canada. So the bad thing is misinformation, disinformation, and the consensus seems to be that science is what gives us reliable information. Let's look for a moment how science actually works here. So there was the case, can you define woman? Marsha Blackburn asked the Supreme Judge nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson to define woman. Brown Jackson replied, I'm not a biologist. The article then tells us that experts say Jackson's answer is scientifically sound. There's no sufficient way to clearly define what makes someone a woman. Of course, if that were true, then not even a biologist actually could tell us what a woman is. Well, let's take the wonderful example of trans people. What actually is a trans person? Well, when you ask the experts, they will tell you transitioning is the time period during which a person begins to live according to their gender identity rather than the gender they were thought to be at birth. Okay. Gender transition looks different for every person. So that's really important. It's not up to us to tell other people whether or not they are trans. Whatever they tell us, we have to accept. Possible steps in a gender transition may or may not include changing your clothes, appearance, name, the pronouns people use to refer to you. Some people are able to change their identification documents, driver's license, passport, and so on. Some people undergo hormone therapy and other medical procedures to change their physical characteristics and make their body better reflect the gender they know themselves to be. Transitioning can help many transgender people lead healthy, fulfilling lives. No specific set of steps is necessary to complete the transition. It is a matter of what is right for each person. So if you hear that and you say, okay, if that is what transition means, fine. However, now we have the issue of detransition. So it turns out that not everybody who became a trans person was actually happy with that transition. and some of them decided to detransition. Now we are told one detransition study claims an 80% desistance rate in trans children. However, when the study was scrutinized, it was discovered that the methodology was deeply flawed. The study in question did not differentiate between the following: young people with gender dysphoria, young people who socially but not medically transitioned, young people who were simply exploring gender diversity. So on the previous slide, they told us essentially whatever somebody says makes them a trans person. When it comes to detransitioning, however, apparently only if you actually medically transitioned, you will count as trans.
What does that sentence mean? One transition study claims an 80% resistance rate in trans children. I don't quite understand what resistance.
That means that 80% of the children that have transitioned then later on return to their original gender. And then, of course, it comes to women or trans women athletes. We have the case of the elite trans cyclist, Dr. Veronica Ivy, who actually was a grad student at Dalhousie, pre-transition. And Dr. Ivy claims there's no relationship between unaltered endogenous testosterone and sport performance. In fact, there is no clear biological list of features that allow us to even remotely cleanly separate men from women. Chromosomes, no. Testosterone, no. Height, no. Actually goes through a lot more. And concludes then, because there are no relevant differences between men and women as male to female trans athletes, I have every right to compete with the women. Of course, it's a little bit dubious how they even can determine who the women are if there's no way to distinguish between them. And just because we're always told we have to pay more attention to indigenous wisdom on gender, as I learned recently when I visited Brunswick, tells us that there are clear differences between men and women. Mi'kmaq men are tall and muscular, they are in charge of fishing, hunting, and wage war. Women gather, prepare food, and so on. So there's a clear distinction between men and women according to indigenous wisdom. Okay, now I actually get to the main point of today's talk, the surely you agree argument that we are very often faced when somebody tells us that we shouldn't invite speaker XYZ to campus, or that we should protect students from being exposed to potentially harmful ideas. And the defenders of limits on freedom of speech often argue that no one believes in unlimited freedom of speech, the kind that was Chomsky defining. And they put forward a hypothetical example. And I took that one actually from the talk that John McWhorter was giving. So if somebody seriously defends the reintroduction of slavery and wants to talk on our campus, we certainly would not agree to have this person talk. Now that actually puts us in a really, really unpleasant position, because there are essentially only two ways to respond to that. One, we can actually defend the right of that hypothetical person to speak on our campus. if we do that, we are usually taken to not just defend their right to speak, but to agree with their views. That is how this game works. Or we could agree that this person really shouldn't be on campus. But if we do that, then we admit that we're not really completely convinced by freedom of speech, that there are exceptions. So my suggestion is, if you ever are encountering one of those surely you agree arguments, don't go there. That's a trap. And there is actually pragmatist reasoning for why you shouldn't engage in this kind of argument. Because your answer really doesn't matter. It does not matter how you answer that question. If you respond, I defend the right of this person who wants to reintroduce slavery to speak on our campus, the other person will not say, oh, you do. Well, in that case, it's okay if, let's say, Jordan Peterson speaks on campus. They won't do that. If you respond, this person that defends slavery should not be on campus, the activists also will not change their mind about having Peterson speak on campus. They have already made up their mind. So it really doesn't matter how I respond to this hypothetical dilemma. So I think it's a much better idea to shift the burden here. So instead of answering this question, surely you agree that this person shouldn't speak, just turn it around and ask them. So why do you ask? Why do you ask about a person talking about the reintroduction of slavery on our campus? Have you recently invited somebody and this person was denied to speak? Presumably they will respond, no, of course not. And you can probably suggest at that point, okay, then let's actually talk about actual cases. So let's talk about somebody who we want to invite. Why should this particular person not be allowed to speak on our campus? Because then we get away from this hypothetical drama that really is entirely irrelevant. Now, this person that supposedly wants to defend the reintroduction of slavery on campus is a completely made up hypothetical person. So we really have no idea what this person would be doing on campus if this hypothetical person would be invited. Maybe it's just someone who wants to talk about the history of slavery, and that might be pretty interesting actually to listen to them. On the other hand, maybe they also want to bring guns and bloodhounds to campus to demonstrate how you catch slaves that have escaped. And then you can say, no, we don't want you here. Not because of what you're saying, but because of the harm that you're likely causing. Hypothetical people don't have any rights and obligations. So the average taxpayer doesn't pay any taxes. The average student doesn't graduate. A hypothetical athlete doesn't win any medals. Hypothetical criminals can't go to jail. And a hypothetical speaker can never have their rights to freedom of speech violated. Actual people, on the other hand, have rights and obligations. Justin Trudeau pays taxes, at least I hope he does. Jennifer Kay will graduate in 2024. Roger Federer won Wimbledon many times. Paul Bernardo went to jail. Lindsay Shepherd, oops, I should have capitalized that, had her free speech rights violated, and so on. Now, it's actually kind of funny when you look at cases that those that are getting quite hysterical about freedom of speech. The kind of arguments that they're making. So this person literally alleged that free speech is killing us. Noxious speech is causing tangible harm. What should we, the government, private companies, or individuals, citizens be doing about it? Using free speech as a cop-out is intellectually dishonest and morally bankrupt. So here you have it. Some speech is designed to drive a woman out of a workplace, or to bully a teenager into suicide, or to drive democracy towards totalitarianism. Yeah, it's really the case. Now, again, the funny thing is one of the examples that this person actually is using. So you may dimly remember Christchurch, New Zealand. There was a gunman who murdered 51 people. The Christchurch gunman, like so many of his ilk, had spent years on social media trying to advance the cause of white power. But these posts he eventually decided were not enough. Now it was time to make a real-life effort post. So it wasn't really his speech on social media that was causing any harm whatsoever. It were his actions. And yeah, we completely agree that those actions are despicable actions, but it wasn't free speech that caused the problem here. And I will actually return to him in due course. Now, the Facebook, Twitter response to hate speech has become pretty predictable. A engages in hate speech. So, for instance, this Christchurch gunman. B reports A to the authorities of Facebook or Twitter. If Facebook or Twitter determines that A engages indeed in hate speech, they ban A. But that really doesn't contribute in any way whatsoever in forcing A to engage with his own views and see that, yeah, maybe I'm an asshole, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. What Facebook and Twitter and other social media companies essentially are doing is passing on the responsibility of engaging with A to someone else. Now, if A gets banned for hate speech on Twitter, he will not suddenly say, oh my God, I did something wrong, I should change my mind. He will, in all likelihood, continue to believe the beliefs that he held that got him on trouble in Facebook and Twitter. Maybe he will get so upset that he acts earlier. So maybe he killed 52 other people. So the allegation is always the same. Hate speech and insults cause harm. Therefore, hate speech must be banned, censored, and so on. So the proverb, we grew up all the sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, has now been reinterpreted many, many times. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can also hurt me. Sticks and stones break only skin, while words are ghosts that haunt me. Pain from words has left its scar on mind and heart that's tender. Cuts and bruises now have healed, it's words that I remember. Way to go to tell people how you can really hurt someone. And we all know how the strategy has been working. The It's Okay to Be White movement has actually capitalized on this idea. So now they are using really innocuous phrases like it's okay to be white to terrorize people, and it works for them. You can even buy t-shirts of this stuff now, including GST, so that must be Ontario, right? And yes, in 2019, they had this horrible incident at the Mount. It felt gross, Jasmine Tang and MSVU student unions, racialized student representative said. She spotted some "it's okay to be white" stickers around 6:30 a.m. on a Friday, but couldn't explain why they made her feel uncomfortable. She didn't even know why she was terrified about those things. She needed to do research to find out that they have something to do with white supremacy groups. Because if you just read the phrase, "it's okay to be white," obviously you wouldn't be terrified. So where will that ever end if we continue down that road to kind of trying to sanitize language, to make sure that nobody ever says something that is bad, stifle free speech more and more and more? And I mean, it's not really that much to laugh about. So there was recently that case in California where somebody in a Zoom lecture had used a Mandarin word that sounds somewhat similar to the N-word. I won't speak it because I like my job. So he was talking actually about that filler phrases that so many of us are using when we give a speech are actually distracting when we are talking. And so he used an example from China because his reasoning was there are a lot of international students in his class who could relate to that. So in China, it might be N. So there's a different word that you'll hear in different countries, but they are so-called vocal disfluencies. An anonymous group of Patton's Black students accused him of racism and harming their mental health by using a Chinese language word that sounded exactly like the word N. So on. Right. And then, of course, nobody pays any attention anymore to the use-mention distinction. So Mike probably can tell us all about why we shouldn't defend the use-mention distinction. And that has led to works of literature that have been banned in public schools, like Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird, Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Tidbit on the side. Those were required reading in East Germany. There are actually really legitimate reasons for banning To Kill a Mockingbird. It makes false advertising. This was exactly how I felt when I read this book the first time. Okay, let's try to undermine this harm argument a little bit. So defenders of limits of freedom of speech often argue allowing X to speak on campus will cause harm to protected groups. So if we were to invite Jordan Peterson, that would cause harm to trans people that feel offended by his views, let's say. Now, even if we grant that Peterson's speech can cause harm to those people, even if he gives them that, in order to have that effect, obviously the speech has to be heard. Freedom of speech does not generate an obligation to listen to anyone. So if we say Peterson has been invited to our campus by some student group. Nobody who will feel he might harm them actually has an obligation to listen to him. In fact, he could speak to an entirely empty room. It wouldn't violate his freedom of speech. So if X speaks on campus, no one who feels threatened by X's speech needs to attend X's talk. And therefore, the talk really cannot cause any harm to people. So let's just return for a moment to the Christchurch gunman. So he had spent years on social media trying to advance the cause of white power, allegedly. So in other words, he let the world know about his frame of mind. And so you really have to wonder, so why did no one ever engage with this guy? Why was no one ever worried about what he might be doing and have a conversation with them? Do you really think that's a good idea, what you're talking about here? Apparently that never happened. But these posts, he eventually decided they're not enough. It was time to make a real life effort post. Now, had he actually been banned from social media, as the author of this article had suggested, he would not have suddenly changed his mind. He probably would have felt much earlier. It's time for action now. I can no longer just talk on social media. Now, obviously, I realize that not everyone can be persuaded by rational argument. But perhaps then somebody should have called the cops and said, this guy seems to be really dangerous. How about you talk to him? Maybe get him a good psychologist or psychiatrist or something like that. So yes, it is not always possible to use better speech, rational argument to get some psychopath persuaded that his views are really, really outrageously wrong. But most people actually aren't psychopaths. So maybe in most cases, if somebody engages in some radical speech on social media, if another person talks with them in a respectful manner, they might actually be willing to listen. Now, very common objection. Well, even if I don't have to listen to, let's say again, Peterson, if he comes to campus, I could accidentally run into him when he's on campus. And then I'm traumatized for life. Okay, again, if you feel that strongly, maybe psychiatrist would be a good idea. I should not be forced to avoid some areas of my campus just of fear to run into Peterson or whoever. Well, the fear here is not really related to Peterson's speech anymore. And the same fear would arise if this person would accidentally run into a doppelganger of Peterson. Somebody who looks just like him, but has entirely different opinions. Or if Peterson would deliver his talk via Zoom or some other online platform, then obviously no one on campus would be exposed to his physical presence. But that actually convince activists, so if we had to say, okay, we just have a Zoom talk with them. I don't think so. I don't think they would be fine with that either. In fact, you are kind of reminded of this wonderful story of the person who tried to get away from death, just to run into death anyway. This is how I sometimes feel when I'm talking to those people that want to argue that, and it's like, no matter what you do, you end up dead. would it not be a lot better to try to empower the so-called victims of hate speech? And we can do that if we remind them. A person who uttered an insult may wish later they had not done so. I think we all have been in that position. Just said something in anger, and then later on we thought, oh, I wish I had never said that. Unfortunately, we live in a forgiving world, so in most cases people will forgive us those little transgressions. But we can never unspeak our words. On the other hand, a person who has been the target of an insult actually can decide what to do about it. And one of the choices they have is they can forgive the person who insulted them. They don't have to. They have no obligation to do that. On the other hand, they also have no obligation to be insulted. So if somebody wants to insult me and I ignore what they're saying, they can repeat the insult over and over and over again. Won't really do anything. So the person who is actually has a choice here is the so-called victim. It might be a good idea to actually remind people of that. We are not really defenselessly exposed to words. We can choose how those words affect us. In other words, we can break the so-called sticks if we really want to do that. And here's one creative way, I think that was in Britain, where some jerk felt compelled to say, speak English to all the immigrants. And so they said, yeah, we speak English and Punjabi and Lithuanian and Romanian and so on. Who are you guys to? That's one way to deal with those so-called hate speech insults. And so just to end, it is impossible to block free speech selectively. So you cannot simply say, I allow this, but I don't allow that. It doesn't work like that. We should never adopt those enemy pictures uncritically. Those so-called protected groups are not some kind of like monolithic whole. Black people don't always all have all the same opinion. This kind of insults that Biden issued, like if you vote for Trump, you're not really black. That's kind of if you consent to blocking somebody else's free speech, at least implicitly you accept that down the road they may block your free speech. And if history has shown us anything, those things change over time. So the group who is ruling right now may not be around 10 years down the road. While it is possible to put limits on free speech, if the penalties are serious enough, you really can eliminate certain speech that you dislike. However, you cannot put limits on what people actually say. So yes, you could have prevented this Christchurch murderer from saying anything on Facebook, but that would not have done anything to his thought process. And we could just try to learn from history. There is no known example where limiting freedom of expression has actually led to a more tolerant and inclusive society. People may never say anything offensive, but that doesn't mean that they are tolerant and inclusive. There are many examples where limiting freedom of expression has actually led to extremism, totalitarianism, and so on. Thank you for your attention.
Questions for Christina?
What's a mitlop?
Mitläufer.
Oh,
That is somebody who basically goes along with the prevailing political view. They are not really themselves convinced of it, but they feel it's in their best interest to pretend that they are okay with it, that at least they are not openly opposing it. The reason that is important is when political currents change, those are the people that will be the first ones to jump ship and then follow whoever the new leader is.
I've never heard of the it's okay to be white movement.
No, you have lived a sheltered life. I guess you.
I mean, I get.
I guess you retired some time ago, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this is something
Yeah.
that. Apparently, some people made it up as a joke. Let's just post some little flyers. It's okay to be white, and it's really cut a nerve. It's kind of similar to like all lives matter,
Yeah,
which
yes.
apparently is racism and so on. So this movement really has taken off, and people get like really paranoid about it, and it's considered to be a hate speech
So
right
I was
now.
saying that those people were motivated by some sort of hate, or just the sort of curiosity of saying, like you say,
I think
all lives don't matter. And it's okay.
I think actually a mixture of both. There were some people who were really motivated by hate, but obviously, if the other side doesn't pick it up, it's okay to be white. Doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
You know, so you need the other side to play their role. They do.
Yeah, we do.
It is, I think it's a provocative statement because,
Is it really?
yeah, I do. And my position is that white isn't, is a power position. So if I said it's okay to be Slovak or it's okay to be British, that's different than saying it's okay to be white, which in an American context implies a position of dominance against other non-white groups. So it kind of reads as it's okay to be dominant. And I think people who might be in a socially subordinate position might just kind of have a bit of a yuck reaction to that.
But see, this is already interpreting something into the phrase.
But
The
that's a
phrase-
stretch. It's just
the phrase
okay, not
itself
great.
Is not really applying that. So you already give it a political meaning.
Yeah,
And
I
that
think
is-
that's what it is, the meaning. Like that's what I think. Yeah, as
yeah, that-
speech, I'm saying it, having the conversation. But that's kind of why I wouldn't say it myself. And the reason I wouldn't say something like all lives matter is because I believe that if there is a group that has a special experience or special needs, we have to go and listen to them and listen to them say what they need to be included. But sometimes if we say all lives, we think of the kind of dominant, typical person that might be a European person, and now all of a sudden we're not including everyone, so we're not going out of our way to listen to them.
Right, but I think that is actually, again, the kind of political overlay to something that is entirely innocuous. It's okay to be white is entirely innocuous. It only becomes a problem if you already put this political meaning into it, which is not really there. And the problem obviously is if we always do that, then pretty soon we end up in a society where we cannot say anything anymore. Because
Or you can say things that are in the current climate acceptable. So if I have a sign that says it's okay to be black, entirely acceptable. But to say it's okay to be white immediately creates hackles in people's mind. It does in Tanya's mind. So it remains okay to say certain things that are sayable. Other things have become bad.
right. But I mean that's one of the problems, you know. So the much better way to respond to something, it's okay to be white, is to say, oh yeah, of course it's okay to be white. Because then you take the power away from them.
Yeah, no, I see your point, and I do support freedom of speech and also freedom of sort of arguing with it. I teach psychology, and people sign up for psychology classes for different reasons, but one group of students would be students who struggled with their mental health, and that's why they're taking my class. And so because of that, I'm a little bit more, I don't know, maybe sensitive with them. So what I do at the beginning of the year is that I say, if anyone needs a trigger warning for any subject, right, if that would bring a lot up for them, because it's some kind of classically conditioned association, then I will do that. So let's say that somebody had been abused for the carrot, right? Child abuse, something terrible, unspeakable. And they said, look, carrots are just a big trigger. It's like a classically conditioned association. Get a rush of emotions. Then if I was going to talk about carrots in class, I would give them a trigger warning. I'd say it's on slide 27. And then I use a 2-minute kind of blue screen. And that gives people kind of time to adjust. And so that's the way I kind of combine freedom of speech with a kind of inclusion thing. So I'm willing to accommodate the fact that somebody finds something triggering. I'll sort of say it anyway, but I will give them a warning so that they know and they can kind of ready themselves. And that's my little kind of way of respecting them. And I choose to do that. Nobody makes me. If somebody made me, I'd be like, how dare you make me? But it's my will.
Exactly. I mean, again, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not advocating that you should go out and if somebody
Say that. No, I take that. Yeah. And you're taking
But-
the power away from insulting things. I do that.
Well, just following up on this question, the harm argument says that certain kinds of language, you hear it, say to somebody, the N-word will cause harm to their mental health. What are we talking about? I mean, we distinguish between not wanting to hear something or disagreeing, or is there an actual, real definition of mental health versus, being unhealthy versus healthy?
Yeah.
How
There's,
this triggers that? I mean, what
so
are we talking about?
what mental health is and what mental illness would be like a really interesting whole seminar that I can give. But I think I might think of that as a trigger in the sense of a classically conditioned association. So you probably all heard of the Pavlov's dog thing.
Yeah.
That they ring the bell and then give food, and then after a while you ring the bell and the dog salivates. That happens to us a lot, and psychological trauma is real, and people have this in their histories. And so something comes up that reminds them of that can just emotionally flood them. And I'm aware of that. I don't necessarily want to do that with my undergraduate students because I want them to be able to focus on my lecture. Right? It would try to get in my way.
So is that what we're talking about here? The hate speech? Does hate speech really mean trigger speech for some people?
Yeah, that can be really upsetting.
But of course, it works the other way around. If I hear, hate speech, that term, for example, it makes me aggravated because I think somebody's trying to shut me down. And, I mean, so there is the general concept of trigger speech.
Yeah, and
which applies to individuals, hard to know, and over the full spectrum, people on the right, people on the left. That seems sensible to be alert to trigger speech, trigger issues.
Yeah.
And on both sides, but is that what people have in mind when they object to, they say hate speech? Are they talking about this or something else?
So yes, with the trigger thing, and then there's also a bit of social context where there's certain communities that might have dealt with abuse for many years. So we did some things that weren't very nice to the Black community in Nova Scotia. Let's say, and that would be happening to people in the 1900s, 1960s, 1950s. Maybe things are a lot better now, but there is a history, and so there's an awareness of that social context. Might say, if somebody's from this group, this might be a kind of issue for them. And you might decide not to.
For some of them.
Exactly. Some might not mind at all. And so my position on that is that anyone that tells me that they have a trigger, I will respect it.
So
I don't deny anyone.
if that were all
Yeah.
that people who object to unlimited free speech have in mind, let's keep in mind that there are certain triggers for people. Let's try to be careful. Then I don't think that would be objectionable. But the anti-free speech movement seems to me, correctly, to identify certain kinds of ideas as being forbidden. Not so much a word that will trigger Pavlovian style of reactions, but a certain class of arguments. If you, for example, want to argue the residential school system, it's actually, in many cases, a very beneficial thing. My understanding is people have lost their jobs. It's not a question of trigger. Maybe somebody does trigger, or maybe nobody does. I'm with you on this. And if nothing else comes out of this discussion, we could focus on that distinction. And people are talking hate speech is trigger speech, when we could be favorably, as free speech advocates, favorably disposed to it. I get that.
Yeah.
But if what hate speech means is certain unacceptable theories,
Yeah.
content that is forbidden, then I think we have to stand up against that.
Yeah, and I think there's different issues. So like, let's say if somebody says something, can they lose their job, or can they go to jail, or can they get fined? That's kind of like that's one piece of an issue. And then if you say something, it might be legitimately offensive to people, and they might be right that it's totally offensive. Like I think the white okay is offensive. I'm not stopping anyone from saying it, but if there was somebody that was, let's say, not white in the room, I don't know. Like there's a part of me that just wouldn't want to do that, because it would just feel very kind of yucky. That's not the same thing as like banning it. Like I guess there's different libertarian principles, and there's a voluntary association, and we can say, okay, I don't like that speaker. I'm not going to go listen to him, right? Because I don't like what he says. I think that's kind of Jordan Peterson says some things I think are brilliant. Other times he makes me cringe.
It's really quite a conversation stopper, or even a class stopper to sort of guide yourself. I mean, triggers you pull, but it's like a minefield. Like you're stepping on things all the time.
You can be.
You don't even know
Yeah.
they're there.
That's why you ask.
Triggering
Yeah.
can be a deliberate action, but this, I mean, I don't back to the end where it always is the example, but like I recall when I was first teaching Quebec, Pierre Valliere came out with this book called Nigger Belongs to Memory that was translated into White Edwards of America. And of course, he was using that word to take on the character of, black victims and apply them to, working class. But if you refer to that, if you taught that history today and just use the title of that book, you could be out of your job. Yeah. So, yeah, triggering is,
But I mean, one of the issues is there are legitimate cases of triggering. And I agree with you, we should be mindful of them. But unfortunately, there are also a lot of people who aren't triggered at all, but who use that in order to shut others out.
Yeah, no, I think people use things politically. People have different motivations. I see different issues. There's like, so let's say that a teacher uses the N word. I think it'd be fine for black students or a group of black students to say, hey, we don't like that. That makes us angry. We don't feel respected, and we don't feel welcome. I think it's fine for them to express that anger. And then maybe there's some way to negotiate that. Maybe the process, hey, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. Or maybe the process, I don't care. I think I should be able to say it. But then, what the whole discipline process, can that person lose their job? Can they go to jail is kind of a different matter.
But I mean, the issues that recently have arisen, like what is a woman?
Yeah.
So those minefields that, what's the gal's name, the Harry Potter author got into trouble for things that, I mean, if you're triggered by that, then maybe.
I was going to say, you said before that mental trauma is real.
It is.
Of course, but it can also be cultivated.
Yeah.
And such that anything can be said to.
So there's ways to, if somebody has a trauma, there's ways to treat that, and it involves integrating into their life, and it often involves a sense of psychological safety, which is a feeling of trust. And sometimes systems, I don't know if you ever had this experience, have you ever had like the administration be out to get you? All of a sudden, the system isn't working for you anymore. And maybe people in HR are combing over everything you've ever done to look for something wrong that you said or did, right? It's biased against you, and you're in that underworld where all of a sudden the system is broken and it's kind of hurting you. So I do, having been there, I'm willing to accept that there's other people that for whatever reasons have been in that kind of underworld of double standards where there's different rules for different people. I see it here at St. Mary's with lower class people. It's a very class sort of elitist space. And if you're kind of a richer, well-to-do or tenured, then you're kind of treated quite well. But then people who can get fired easily get scapegoated, right? Students who don't have a sort of upper middle class background feel like a fish out of water. I just lost my thread. But yes, there are ways to cultivate adaptability in people and resilience. And I'd say one of them is being in a system that isn't corrupt. And I've seen a lot of corruption in the system.
And like, to me, it really seems that unfortunately there are people that exploit those who are genuinely
That's true. I see that too.
triggered by things, and then instead of giving them coping mechanisms, because like one way to deal with those kind of triggers is slowly and in safe settings expose them so that they over time build resilience to it.
Yeah.
But they don't do that. They don't offer them. They use them essentially as excuse so nobody can say carrot.
I see a lot of that stuff get exploited by people in power who have some kind of agenda. And I don't really, when I see this stuff happen, I'm not seeing it come from the marginalized people who are just trying to get along. I'm seeing it comes from the very privileged high-up people who are able to exploit this to increase their own power and get the people that challenge them. And it's about them, not about the people who are marginalized. Yeah. So one of the things I don't like to see is that I see that diversity is being used to cover up ethical issues. So if there's going to be a cronyistic appointment, let's get the black guy to announce it and put him at risk. And I really hate that because I see that as exploiting EDI narratives.
In your talk, and I hear it's quite a bit, this has introduced quite a few discussions of this, there is the use mention distinction. And this is used to criticize people who complain about the N-word. So look, there's a big difference between saying, may I use the word?
Yeah.
Saying
you can mention it.
someone is a nigger compared to the word nigger has 6 letters. And of course, philosophically, there is a distinction. But if we're worried about triggering, I wonder if triggering doesn't just not know about the use mention distinction, if I can put it that way. So if the position you're putting forward is, yes, triggering is something we have to be very careful and very mindful of, but then at the same time saying, well, the use mention distinction is critical here, I feel a little bit of tension.
Well, the thing is that usually we are mindful of interaction with students. So if I realize that there's one student in my class that is really traumatized, then yes, I go out of my way to not expose them to any triggering experience.
Use or mention.
Exactly, because I mean, there is really no need to use the N-word either.
Or mention it.
Or mention it, right? But I mean, the thing is that when Wendy Messley was, she was what, like in a meeting, in a staff meeting, and she was mentioning the book title.
Yes.
And if she gets fired for that, then something has gone seriously wrong.
But I would say that if she got fired for that, she probably didn't get fired for that. There's probably someone who had it up for her for some totally other reason was able to use that. Because I don't think they hire really care.
We're talking about a television station that wanted to ban, what was that thing? It's cold outside. Seriously.
Yeah, that's right. But I
Those
wonder,
things have gone way too far.
I wonder when you're going out of your way to avoid so-called triggering, aren't you contributing, possibly in a big way, to the cultivation of this idea that the world's just fraught with danger?
Right.
We can't possibly cope.
Yeah.
And all of these protections have to be put into place with people to administer all these protections and offices to oversee administering of protections.
Right, right.
Et
So,
cetera,
so
et cetera, et
what,
cetera.
what I was referring to is if I have a specific student that, as she said, like before classes comes to me, and okay. However, like I'm not a psychologist, you know, I would also recommend to that student that if it's that bad, if just the mere mentioning of, let's say, the word carrot can trigger an episode, then they really ought to get some medical help, some expert help. That is not my job. I cannot do that. So I can try to, if it doesn't interfere with my teaching. Now, if I teach in agriculture and our subject is raising of carrots, then I'm sorry, I cannot constantly avoid saying carrot, you know, but the student probably, if it's that serious, wouldn't take that course as the first
And we can
place.
refer too. So students bring up mental health stuff with me, and I'll say, you know, there's the counseling center, and there's the career counselor, and there's the student help, and these are the 4 different routes that you can use to connect with the professional who can provide those skills that I can't, right? Professionally or ethically do.
And I mean, you're absolutely right about we cannot provide an environment where the triggering word is never ever uttered. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
Even if we put in all kinds of restrictions and whatnot, and you, John, get fired if you ever say the word carrot. If somebody says the word carrot, you cannot undo it. And so everyone needs to have some kind of coping mechanism for that eventuality. Because if it's really the case that just hearing the word carrot will send a person into like a suicidal episode, then we better have something in place for him just in case somebody is not willing to go out of their way to protect
I
them.
think in a good system, we have that. And if that's happening, say, report to the right office. I think there's a difference between being forced to do something and doing it because you want to, because it's the maybe the decent thing.
I think Bill had a question or comment.
I was just going to ask, you know, where do you separate slander and libel from free speech? It seems that people
Well, I mean,
can use speech to destroy or hurt the reputation of a worker, a boss. You know, there's a lot of that sort of stuff.
But I mean,
it doesn't work.
we obviously have all kinds of law in place to deal with that. You know, if something is a criminal
Yeah, I was
offense.
going to say, in Canada, they're kind of weak. You know, a person who is
Right.
loses their livelihood through a sort of slanderous group in the office, that kind of thing. You know, they may get half of your salary or something like that, but their careers are really.
Realize that our
But yet, if you mention the wrong trigger word, it's.
Right. But I mean, the thing is, those kind of examples are usually used to really instill fear in people who want to defend freedom of speech. And you have to become aware of that. Yes, there are serious cases, just like this Christchurch shooter. So this was a serious psychopath. And yeah, somebody should have paid attention to all the stuff that he said on social media. It's like, why was nobody paying any attention to that? That is what puzzles me about that.
We have 5 folks that are listening. If you could come a little this way so that they can see you, and
Okay.
because the microphone is here and that's picking up your voice. Would anyone, any of you guys online like to ask any questions? You're very welcome to unmute yourselves, and I think I have the room audio up here. And I'll just see if there's a chat. Oh, we had questions in the chat from Henry. A story about a professor fired for one reason, 15 years old, but the real reason was free speech. And then Andrea said, thanks for the link, political correctness may trim free speech in some situations.
Right, so this was the Joshua Katz case, who had defended free speech. Right after he did that, he got fired for allegedly being involved in sexual
Well,
harassment.
this is the fellow at Yale.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a question. What again is the trap that you described? I wasn't sure I understood what the situation was.
You don't have a good answer there, no matter what you do, you're basically a bad person.
What's the situation again?
So-
Someone says,
So let's say somebody who's like Hitler wants to come to campus, and you might as a free speech guy, and you say everybody should get the right to speak.
well, what do you mean wants to come to campus? I thought that the context would be something like a professor has invited someone to a class, or a university group has invited someone.
It doesn't really matter what.
Okay.
The argument always goes, remember what John McWhorter was saying. Surely we all agree that if somebody were to argue for the reintroduction of slavery, that person shouldn't be given the right to speak. And then in Q&A, Bruce Purdy said, are you suggesting this person shouldn't be allowed to climb on a park bench? And so he said, well, yeah, I'm a park bench, that I don't want to interfere with that kind of thing. Thing is, if you go down that rabbit hole, you either end up saying, yes, this person has the right to say whatever they want to. It doesn't mean they have to come to our campus. It's not like I have to invite them. But if there's a group at St. Mary's that wants to invite them and has the funding and whatnot, and this person is scheduled to speak on campus, and let's say this person is a Holocaust denier or something like that. If I defend his right to speak on campus, I will be painted as somebody who agrees with Holocaust deniers.
That occasionally happens, but sometimes not. Yeah.
No, the people who want to undermine freedom of speech are the ones that will equate me with the Holocaust denier. Even if all I'm saying is he has a right to speak. I don't agree with him. I will not attend to talk. I have better things to do with my time. The moment I defend his right to free speech, I will be equated with this person.
But it seems
If, on the other hand, I say, no, this person really shouldn't be on our campus, then they will say, ha, so you're not really a free speech person.
But I think I think you're mischaracterizing the example, because it's not. I'm not defending the person's freedom of expression.
We agree with that.
No, what I'm doing is I'm defending the right. I don't like that word, but anyway, defending the prerogative of the group to invite whom they wish. Defending the prerogative of the professor. So I'm defending academic freedom. Not freedom of expression, and the academic freedom of those who have invited the speaker.
But it doesn't have to be a speech on campus. The general right of somebody to talk about Holocaust denial.
Yeah, no, I've defended those who publish obnoxious newsletters. They should be free to do so.
Right.
But I think the example, though, that you've given was about somebody coming to campus. And it would be somebody from off campus. That would mean that someone has invited them. Here we can legitimately say, look, this group should not have invited this person, and give our reasons. Of course, the university should ensure that the presentation goes ahead. We may not. We may protest it. I don't think we should, but we may protest it as long as we do not interfere
Yeah, but I
with
mean,
it.
essentially you would defend their right to free, to give their presentation.
No, I'm not doing that at all. I'm defending the prerogative of the people who invited to engage in their academic projects as they will. And that doesn't mean that we can't evaluate it later.
Sure. I mean, there is nothing to, and that happens all the time. We can take way less controversial issues. So we may invite a speaker who promises to talk about climate change. And it turns out he is an absolute know nothing. And so afterwards, we probably all would be saying that we could have spent those 2 hours much better. I mean, that happens, you know. So what is the issue with this? We all agree is that we don't all agree. And what they want to do is they want to push you in this corner where you are forced to say, yes, I agree this person should come to campus, because the alternative to say, no, he shouldn't be coming to campus is, oh, so you're not really for free speech.
Well, no, I don't mind that. I'm happy to do that. So I wasn't sure what the bite of the hypothetical people aren't people criticism was. So someone says, well, hypothetically, Mark, this person denies the humanity of these people. Well, let them deny the humanity of these people. I'm happy to defend freedom of expression. So I'm not sure what the rabbit hole is.
Well, if you actually do that, if you talk to some of those people who claim that somebody like Peterson denies the humanity of a trans person, I mean, look what happened to Lindsay Shepherd. If she had not been of the presence of mind to record the interrogation, she probably would have disappeared without a degree.
I had somewhat the same reaction as Mark with that example about inviting somebody who wants to reintroduce slavery. He said that's a trap. I don't see it as a trap.
Okay.
I think it's justifiable to say, yes, I want to invite that person, regardless of what they want to say. That is, I agree with you. I think
Right.
that's a way to state your position. On the other hand, I like your escape clause that instead of getting into that argument, which will not change anybody's mind anyway, it's better to run the question back on them and say, why don't you want to invite that person? Or something won't let them explain their reasoning rather than me explaining my reasoning.
Exactly.
So I think as a tactic, I agree with you. The idea of the trap, I don't agree with that part.
Well, the reason you guys don't agree that it is a trap is because you believe in freedom of speech. You have to remember, the other side does not believe in freedom of speech. They believe the moment you allow somebody who denies the Holocaust on campus, you are an ally of the Holocaust denier.
I'm sorry.
No, but I mean, seriously, this is their mindset. And I mean, like Roya was talking about that as well. It's not really that much about freedom of speech. It's about activism. And as an activist, you hate everyone who is
On the other side.
exactly, who is not fighting those people. And if you allow them to speak on campus, you're not fighting them. So you don't fulfill your obligation to fight those people.
Yeah, because the question of slavery, you know, who would defend would come to you. But there may be someone like the 76 Project, which is a group of Black academics in the South, in America, that may want to come to campus and explain that slavery was Buddhist to the West and so on and so on. There's a history of slavery that they're not quite understanding, and so on and so forth. But that is generally sort of brushed off as their defense. And that's the way.
I think the example might be, a good example might be those who defend those who would attempt to, who speak in favor of restricting a woman's right to choose abortion. Right. The organized pro-choice groups are I mean, they have an end in view, and that is to protect the status quo with regard to abortion in Canada. Right? And you know, I'm all with them. And so when I have engaged with in discussions and debates with pro-life people, I'm seen as abandoning the cause.
Exactly.
Right? Because the intellectual engagement with the problem is dangerous.
Right.
It's dangerous because it might cause people to attempt to undercut a fine institution that we have here in Canada. Now, no one's ever accused me of being pro-life, right? So it hasn't gone that far. But you're seen as an enemy, as someone who is dangerous, who is not putting the good of who's not putting the social good above the intellectual engagement with a problem. And of course, I admit that for me, the engagement with intellectual problems, I'm happy to put social goods at risk. I mean, so was it? So in a way, they're right. This is dangerous.
Well, I mean, in a way, it is similar to what we were talking about earlier with the trigger. In most cases, if we have a discussion about abortion rights, let's say, it is very, very unlikely that people who are right now convinced that the woman should have the right to abortion suddenly will say, oh my, what you just said completely changed my mind.
That happens.
We have a comment from Henry. Henry, you're welcome to unmute and speak, but we can see, I can't read that, it's too far away from me.
Well, I was just making I just put a link in, I think it may have been mentioned during the talk, I'm not sure, of a with what Madison believed in First Amendment. So that, and I guess Christine mentioned this already anyway, that it's a bulwark of freedom and shall be inviolable. I just thought the link would be interesting. It's just the whole article I think is interesting.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Christina, I'm afraid I have to go. Sorry.
I'd like to ask about
See you
sort of
around.
recording. Should I be sort of trimming off the Q&A session to maybe people, I don't know, I'm wondering if people not want to be like on the recording. I'm trying to think of people's like safety. How do I go edit this? Like I don't know.
I'm fine,
With that, okay.
Maybe you should.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. I'm Tanya.
I'm Carmen.
Carmen. Are you guys new people?
No.
So one question did
Graduate.
Well, a graduate.
Your discipline.
Yeah.
did Musk and Twitter come up at all during the talk? I didn't hear it.
No. I hope that Musk succeeds with Twitter, but that's all I will say on that one.
Well, other questions for Christina?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you.